Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about buyer-seller meetings in the M&A process. And so this video is dedicated towards business buyers that are looking to understand the do's and don'ts of meeting sellers and managing those meetings in order to communicate a level of credibility and to ensure that the seller likes you and that ultimately they will accept your offer. So, as you go through the buy-sell process, there is a point where the prospective buyer and the seller will meet. And this is usually referred to as the management meetings or the site visit if there are physical assets that you need to see. And this is a critical time for the buyer who needs to communicate their style and capability, and also the seller who needs to present their business in a positive light in order to attract offers. And so there's a fine balance between presenting well in order to sell yourself as a buyer, but also getting the information that you need from the seller in order to draft and submit an offer. So how do you manage the meeting? How do you manage the topics? What do you focus on in the beginning portion and near the end? So these are kind of the things that I'm going to be walking you through. And obviously, I'm going to be giving you the insight into how a seller thinks through this. So our firm is an M&A firm based in Toronto, Canada. And so we primarily work with lower mid-market businesses. And so we have a very good understanding of how sellers think in these meetings. And the first thing I always say is that don't forget, this is the first business sale usually for a seller as well. So they're nervous, they don't understand the process either, and so they're going to be leaning on their advisor to really guide them through these meetings. And so from the business buyer perspective, however, it's not actually good for the advisor to be really controlling the conversation because, I don't really know what you're looking for as the buyer. What are you looking to drill down into? What kind of information are you looking for? So if the business advisor really drives the conversation, they're going to, give softball questions to their client, and ultimately, probably the effectiveness of that meeting is not really high. So from a buyer's point of view, what you want to do is you want to be prepared, respectful, and purposeful in your communication style. And the best buyers that we usually see in these meetings are the ones that have an agenda, that understand what they're looking to get out of that meeting, and communicate that to the seller upfront, before, and throughout the meeting so that no one really is at a loss in terms of what this buyer is looking for. Okay? So everything starts with the pre-meeting planning. And so just as a background, typically these buyer-seller meetings are going to last anywhere from 1 to 2 hours, usually for the first meeting, and they may extend a little longer, if it's a perfect fit and, obviously the seller has time. But ultimately, time is a relative to the process. If the process is ultra competitive, there's many buyers that are coming in and day out. Most likely the broker is going to keep things short, maybe give you 30 minutes, an hour, and then that's all you're going to get with the seller before you have to submit an offer and qualify your level of interest. So maximizing your time, however long it is really critical to make sure that you're getting what you need as the buyer in order to put the best offer forward. And so how do you do that before you get into the meeting? So the first is pre-call with a broker. So call the broker before you go into that buyer-seller meeting and ask them, well, help me understand the seller's style and personality. How do they respond? How have you dealt with them? What has your experience been like? And try to gain some insights into how the seller handles their communication style and how they do business. And ultimately, I think the key thing to focus on is the seller really on top of their financials? Are they really detail-oriented business owners, or are they more reliant on their accountants for the details and they're more gut feeling, older school owners that aren't really looking at KPIs and profit per customer and margins and all that kind of stuff? So you really want to understand what type of seller are you dealing with, because the reality is if you go into a meeting and you ask the seller for all this information and they're not geared towards that type of detail, well, first of all, the seller's not going to be able to answer your information. There's incompatibility there where the seller feels that they can't answer your questions. Oh, geez, I feel stupid now and you're making me feel bad. And ultimately, comfort doesn't really breed in that type of environment. So you want to make the sellers kind of feel comfortable in this initial meeting as you're introducing yourself. So you want to give them good questions that they can answer, but not questions that are completely out of their competency. And ultimately, they just sit there with their hands up and saying, sorry, I can't answer that. So I think going to the broker first and asking them how they would run this meeting, what type of communication style should I expect, is the first thing. Now, once you do that, you then summarize really your intentions for this meeting by putting that into an agenda. So we always ask our buyers before the buyer seller meeting to give us an agenda. High level topics. You don't need to list out question by question. It's just more broad, overarching subtitles. What are you looking to really touch on? Competitors, pricing, outlook, reason for sale, management team, key employees, key customers, whatever the case is. And ultimately, what that does is it helps, again, manage the expectations of the seller so that they're better prepared for the meeting and so that they're not surprised when you go in and you start probing on that type of information. And so ultimately, this again just makes sure that the meeting is effective, that the seller is ready, that the seller has the information available for you. And ultimately, if you have more specific questions and the broker told you, hey, listen, they're not on top of their financials, then give those specific questions up front to the broker. They'll get the information from the accountant or the CFO in the company. And then ultimately, the owner will have that answer already available for you when you're in that meeting so that you can discuss. And that makes the seller feel a lot more comfortable. And obviously, you probably get the answer that you're looking for in terms of that financially specific question. So again, agendas are a valuable tool to manage expectations and really control the conversation. And especially if you as a buyer or the seller, love to go off on tangents, it's a great way to keep the other on track in a respectful manner. Instead of saying, hey, be quiet, you can just gently kind of push them towards, hey, just referring back to the agenda. We only had 10 minutes for this topic, moving on, right? So it's a more gentle, lines within the sand that allow you to control the seller's conversation pattern. So the next recommendation I'd say is develop a company or investor profile for you. And so that's not a resume, but it's more just a one-pager that summarizes your background, what you're looking to do. So especially if you're an individual investor that doesn't own a business, well, what can you really bring to the table in terms of background information? Well, the careers that I've previously had, the jobs I've held, what I've done at those jobs, and ultimately a background on what you're looking to do. I'm looking to buy a small business between $1 to $10 million in Ontario or in California, wherever the case is. So you kind of define your search, you define your background, and you give that up front. Again, it allows the seller to prepare for who they're meeting with, and hopefully it will garner some questions so that when you go into that meeting, they can start asking you some questions about your background and probing about your career. Now, another thing, before the meeting, read the CIM, read the financial documentation that the broker has provided and any other things that have been given to you, simply because if you start asking questions that have already been answered in the CIM or that you seem to not have read the CIM, it shows a lack of seriousness. And funny enough, sellers actually care about the CIM, especially for our clients. Like, we work very hard on developing a very detailed CIM, and the client works together with us in preparing that. So they've invested a ton of hours into this document, which they've given to you. Now you've gone into this meeting not reading that, and it just shows a lack of respect towards the effort they've put into that document and gathering that information for you. So read the materials, make sure. Again, this is basic advice, but ultimately, funny enough, some people don't do this. And so just be up to date on all the information. And then the last thing, here's another basic thing that your mom or dad has told you before when you go to your first job interview. Get an understanding of the dress code. So if you're over or underdressed, it can result in a little bit of a mismanaged expectations, right? So if it's a dress down policy and you dress in a suit, it comes off as you're too professional maybe for this business, or employees are going to turn an eye towards you and say, I've never seen a suit in this office before, which raises questions and, threatens confidentiality of the business sale. On the other end, I've seen this many times where, some young punk shows up with some jeans and maybe a dress shirt and tries to really speak to an owner, and the owner's trying to take them seriously, but they're dressed like they're a teenager or that they're going to the movies. So dress code is just as important. So again, talk to the broker, get an understanding of how should I dress for this meeting so that you don't make a mistake there, okay? So talking about mistakes, let's talk about the things that you should avoid. And so what I really want to focus on is, why are these buyer-seller meetings so important? I kind of highlighted it here at the top. Really, if a seller likes you and a seller really finds that, you're a really good fit for them, typically they'll give you an extra push. It'll give you a bit of an advantage. And we always see this in an auction being on the sell side, where a seller says, "Oh man, I really want, John to make it to the next round. Can you call him and just tell him, hey, listen, you need to be at this range, not the range that you're currently at, just so they can go in." So if you do a good job in these meetings, it actually translates to a higher probability of you winning that deal. So that's why you need to invest the time and the effort into making sure that you don't make these mistakes. Okay. So the first one and the most common one that I always, always, always see, especially with financial investors, mid or late career financial investors, is they talk too much. They just blab away and they don't really have a clear pitch. They don't really have a clear understanding of the meeting agenda and staying on track. And they talk too much. They either talk over the seller or they talk over the spouse. I've seen that before, where they'll cut off usually the owner's wife as she's trying to deliver a point and kind of, yeah. Anyways, so going back to, and all of a sudden it just communicates a level of disrespect towards someone that's critical to the owner's decision-making process and puts you as the buyer at a disadvantage. So 2 ears, one mouth. Make sure that you control the amount of time that you're talking. And typically, you want to talk in the early phases of the meeting, give some background, really give a good understanding to the seller of who you are. But ultimately, the back half and the remaining 3/4 of the meeting, you should be asking questions and letting the seller talk, because people love hearing themselves talk, right? So ultimately, you don't want to talk over the seller. And essentially it's an hour long of you describing yourself and your perspectives on the business. The seller doesn't care about your perspectives, they care about who you are, and then really it's about getting them to talk about their business. The second one is arrogance. And this is another one that I've seen, really derail deals. And it can be a small comment like, well, a simple business like this, a simple business, a phrase like that can really irritate a seller. Because ultimately, you may be a financial investor or someone that hasn't worked in the business before. And so if you walk into that meeting either not appreciating and being humble enough to say, I don't know this business, but I want you to teach me, but rather, yeah, I've learned businesses before. I can do a good job at this. This looks fairly simple to me. Some sellers are going to be offended by that. And it's simply because they're passionate about their business. They've worked many, many decades in this industry. And all of a sudden, here's some person that's outside of our industry circle that's coming in and telling me that they can do a better job than me. And the very essence of buying a business is to optimize and to grow. So funny enough, they kind of understand that. But when you kind of say it head on that this is a simple business, I really see myself. You quickly exiting the business. I can take this over. I can run this, and I can do better than you are. And stuff like that. It just really throws a wrench into that whole relationship building, and it makes the seller not really like you because you're acting like an ass. Okay, and the next mistake I see sometimes is that buyers are going to try to get more information around the sale process, the offer value, where are others offer and where are other offers ranking against mine, trying to get deal details when the seller is standing right there. And the challenge with that is the very essence of an advisor is to be the middle ground between a buyer and the seller, to manage that tension, to deliver the difficult news that, hey, your offer's too low or your offer's not competitive enough. But if you bring that discussion into the meeting room with the seller, it results in a lot of awkward conversations. And I've seen some of our clients really get mad and say, hey, do they not know the etiquette? Like, you're not allowed to talk about that, only with you guys, my broker, but no one else. So just be careful that you're not going to touch, like a pain point there around valuation, because maybe something will be said from the seller's perspective, and then ultimately the meeting will fall apart. So it's just inefficient to talk about deal-related items in that meeting. The other critical thing I've seen sometimes, and it only happens rarely, the pros are pretty good at this, but the more amateur investors, individual investors, first-time business buyers don't really appreciate confidentiality and being quiet in the office. When you walk in the door, you're not going up and saying, hey, listen, I'm here to meet ABC M&A firm and John. I'm one of the buyers for the business. Obviously, you're not going to go up to the secretary and say it like that, or you're not going to walk and tour the facility and say, hey, John, why are you selling the business today? Or, hey, John, seeing that you're selling the business, do you think this business is going to grow again next year? Blah, blah, blah. If you don't really respect the rules of confidentiality and you don't show respect towards the thin walls or the employees that are walking around that meeting, it can really irk the seller, get them nervous, and make them shut down and not really be open with you. Because all of a sudden, here's this guy that people have seen walk in the door, start asking me about all these buying a business, selling my business questions. People are hearing that. I don't want this guy on my premises ever again. Get him out of here. So respecting confidentiality is critical. And sometimes even talking too loudly is offensive. So it's really important to check with the seller. Hey, are we okay to talk here? May I, on the tour around the facility, ask you questions about the business, or should I just keep my mouth shut and we talk about that once we're back in the office? So it's important to check in on that. Very, very important. The other one, just basic, is poor manners. Maybe the owner doesn't like to swear, is very religious, and you drop an F-bomb, okay? It screws them up. Same thing with dress code. You show up in jeans, or you show up late, or you're disrespectful to the secretary. Oh, you don't know who I am. Oh, you don't need to worry about that. Whatever type of little thing, all these little quirks that I've seen over the years with buyers walking in the door. Again, try to put a cap on it. When you own the business, you're the boss. You can do whatever you want. You want to slap the secretary? I'm not telling you to do that, but you could do that if you wanted to. But really, when it comes to presenting yourself, it's almost like a job interview. You're selling yourself to the seller that you're respectful, that you're going to take care of their people. And so these type of poor manners really communicates the opposite message. And then the other thing, this is a recent example. So for strategic investors, people that are already in the business. So funny enough, there was a manufacturing company that was buying another manufacturing company, bigger, a bigger firm. And so the bigger firm started talking about, we're really excited to buy you. And then in the next breath, they were talking about how someone else had approached them about potentially them purchasing, the person that approached them. And, they're like, oh, we would never buy those losers. They're so unprofitable. Their business sucks, blah, blah, blah. Guy walks out, and funny enough, our seller is friends with the person that they were talking about. Just completely destroyed trust in that buyer. So just don't badmouth people, especially when you're in that industry or close to that industry. It looks poor. It looks classless. You want to put on, again, a persona, whether it's fake or not, that you're respectful and that you're not going to badmouth people. Because from the seller's point of view, hey, what if this person one day starts bad-mouthing me that, oh, I took advantage of John. Oh, I got a really good deal on him. He's an idiot, blah, blah, blah. You just don't want to kind of put yourself in that position. So on the opposite end, so those are the mistakes. Let's focus on the best practices. So how do you approach this meeting? What are things that you should do right away? And so I kind of put my hat on when I was writing this presentation, and I kind of focused on, I probably have 5 or 6 really, really good financial family office private equity firms that anytime we bring them into one of our clients, they just knock it out of the park. They do such a good job. And I kind of distilled their pitch to these, bullet points here. So the first is right out of the gate, they find a common ground. They try to identify something that they can relate to the seller with. And so I'll give you a good example. There's a family office, highly successful. They're worth millions upon millions of dollars, right? Very wealthy people. But they walk in the door, and the first thing that they say is, my father started this business when he came to this country. He was an immigrant. He had $5 in his pocket, and he built this business on these values. And he listed those values and passionately believed in those values. And funny enough, a lot of sellers will associate themselves with that story. They'll say, you know what? Yeah, I built this business like that. You know what? My dad built this business like that. And so you immediately build trust that, no, here's a financial person or a strategic buyer, whatever, that, wants to buy my business, but understands my story. So find the common ground. But the other bullet point, the next bullet point, is having the emotional intelligence to read the room. Once again, if you've talked to the broker, they'll probably give you some tips or at least indications as to the seller's personality. But if you're meeting the seller for the first time, again, don't kind of be too rash. Just listen to how they answer questions. Listen to how they deal with information. And again, you want to kind of read the room and say, maybe the seller's not strong enough. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they don't really trust me. So I need to work extra hard to focus on those areas to fill those holes. And here's a good example. So we walked in a very, very successful medical business, and we're selling. The seller is a very kind of personable lady that built this business. And so two investors come in, they're working together. One investor, he had a previous medical business and he was very personable, very good. The other was a financial oriented type analyst, cared only about the numbers, didn't really see the people in the business. And so, funny enough, that person led the entire meeting, whereas his partner was actually probably the better person to lead the meeting. And so they walked away, and that seller hated them. I'll never sell to those people. I can't see myself dealing with that person. But she was specifically talking about the financial guy, the guy that cared about the financial details. So the next meeting, we said, give them another try. So we brought him in for the second meeting. This time we told the second guy to stay at home. Don't even come. Okay. So now the personable person comes in and, he's not drilling down into the financials. He's talking about people management, customer management, marketing, really kind of the more softer qualitative issues. And she just absolutely fell in love with him. And funny enough was like, so long as I don't see the other guy, I'm comfortable in selling to these people. So sometimes you just have to read the room and say, am I the right fit? Do I have to bring in another team member? How do I really handle the seller's personality? Now, the third point kind of feeds on the first point around common ground, but being approachable is so critical. So once again, the seller doesn't know this process. It's their first time selling the business. Most likely, they just learned EBITDA 8 months ago. They don't know what a DCF is. They don't know what, like adjustments are. Like they're very kind of basic financial jargon because they haven't needed to, right? They built their business. They don't care about EBITDA when you're selling, truck tires or whatever the case is, right? So, when you come in and you may be more comfortable with this lingo and a grasp of these concepts, you don't want to talk above the seller and say, oh, I see that your EBITDA conversion rate is blah, blah, blah. And, your cash conversion cycle is blah, blah. It's like the seller doesn't know what you're talking about. And B, they're not going to be able to relate to you. They're not going to be able to trust you, to talk to you comfortably because here's this person, this hoity-toity suit that is trying to talk to me at this level. And I know how to talk business. I know how to talk my business. So do you want to talk about my business? Or do you want to talk about these financial things? So lower that language to their level of operations, to their comfort level, so that you can speak their language. And if you speak their language, you'll see that they'll be a lot more open and feel much more comfortable with you. So that's a really big one, especially for financial investors. Private equity firms all the time make this mistake, especially guys that come in, think that they're the center of the world, and they talk above the seller. And then the seller, after the meeting's like, I don't even know what they were saying. I can't even relate to them. And it's like, well, they're a good fit, but they just didn't present themselves in a good way. Now, the fourth point is staying humble. So once again, we're talking about finding a common ground, finding that story that they've built their business this way and you've built your business this way. The best way I can describe this is, regardless of how successful you are, if you walk in there and say, "I can afford your business. I've done very well," and the reason why I've done well is because of these things. I focused on hard work. I've invested in key people. I've done a good job serving my clients, and I've always worked to deliver on that extra mile. Just saying, and it's not platitudes, but just saying these types of things, for a seller is music to their ears because a lot of people forget to say these things. So when it's actually said, it's actually like, wow, here's someone that actually follows my principles that I built my business on. And again, it comes off as humbling, even though you may be very successful, you may roll up in a really nice car. At the end of the day, there's someone that cares about the fundamentals of how I built my business. Now, the next point is listen, okay? Listen is really key here. 2 ears, one mouth, okay? Same thing as I've already said this before. You should be talking maybe 25, 30% of the time. 70% of the time should be the seller. Direct questions towards them, control the meeting with your agenda, but let them talk. And maybe they don't like to talk a lot, so you need to kind of keep asking questions and kind of guiding them along, but never put yourself in a position where they stop talking and you just start talking to fill the time and to fill the air. Because at the end of the day, that's wasting their time. And again, it just shows a lack of care as to wanting to hear what they need. Because if you listen, funny enough, you're going to figure it out. And so I'll jump to the last point, which is reinforce their needs. If you're listening and they're saying, I'm really worried about confidentiality and I love my employees, I want to give them a bonus after I sell. And then you take that and you've listened to it and you've heard it, and then you regurgitate that back to them and say, hey, listen, the last deal that I did, no one in the industry found out. Only 6 months after the transaction went through did we make an announcement, at which point the seller was already transitioned. Boom. You've addressed confidentiality. Same thing with employees. Well, in the last business I bought, or what I envision myself doing, is that I'm going to actually give a bonus plan to employees and blah 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 blah, and so address their needs, so that when they walk away from that meeting, all these guys have given them the standard pitch. We're a fund. We're an investor that wants to buy profitable businesses. Okay, everyone's the same in that regard, but the seller's specific needs are unique. And if you can position yourself to address their needs, then you're unique as well as a buyer. So again, these are soft things that sellers really care about, and it's really important. And then this point over here about being concise, I've kind of said it already, but just don't ramble on. Get to the point, deliver clear messaging, just so that the seller can walk away and say, that person knows what I want, that person is going to do what I want, and therefore I'm comfortable in doing business with them. Okay, so let's put the hat on, and I'm going to give you kind of some insights into how the seller thinks. Okay, so we largely represent sellers. We're not a buy side firm. We sell 10 to 20 businesses a year, and we're always on the sell side. So the very first thing I've already told you about before is that this is probably the first time they're selling their business, but also they view you as a buyer as an outsider. They're an outsider coming in, learning about my business for the first time. And so as an outsider, I don't really trust you. I'm a little sensitive about sharing my financial information because I've never done this before. And so I really kind of care about who they are as people. So in this meeting, from their point of view, from the seller's point of view, they really care about the soft things. Sellers focus largely on soft issues. Don't get lost too much into the details. And so these are the most common questions, I get asked when, I bring a buyer to the table and they say, okay, how do they get there? Who are they? What's their career path? What's their motivations? What are they doing with their life? Okay. Are they a search fund? They always wanted to own a business because, their parents owned a business and, they've done 5 years in private equity. They've worked an operational role, blah, 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 whatever the case is. Why are they interested in my business? Like, why me? What specifically do they like about my business? And in a way, if you can communicate that clearly, it's a bit, kind of blowing smoke up their ass, because obviously you're saying, wow, you're really good in this and you're really good in this. But at the same time, it communicates, again, why do I care about your business? Why am I going to go the extra mile and actually close this deal? So why are they interested in my business? How are they as a business owner or manager? So if you've never owned a business, talk about management skills. And if you've owned a business, talk about that past deal. Have they done this before? Have they ever bought a business before? Same thing. If you have, delve down into that experience. How did that go? How did the seller transition out of the business? How long did it take? Any turnover with employees? How did the business do afterwards? So delving down into, your operational style and your past experiences are key. So in the early portion of the meeting, these are the things you need to focus on. All these qualitative soft issues are critical to getting your brand across as a buyer. What type of buyer are you? Are you a financial leverage only? I only care about the models and quarterly reports? Or am I a touchy-feely owner that goes in there and really cares about legacy, that's going to protect your legacy and deal with employees in a fair manner, work out of the office every day, get on the road and work with my employees? What type of owner are you going to be? Okay. And they're going to also care about protecting their legacy. Are these people going to protect my legacy? Are they going to change my business name? Are they going to fire employees? Are they going to let go of my nephew that works in the accounting department? How's that going to happen? How financially capable are you in making this acquisition? Do you have the money to close this deal? Where did you get the money? And you don't have to specifically say, hey, I have $500,000 in my account. You can say, listen, I've done very well in banking. I've worked 15 years. I climbed to manager level. And so I've saved enough that, now's the time to go out and buy a business. Okay, perfect. That's really all you need to say. But again, communicating the financial aspect of being capable to close that deal is important to the seller. And then another thing that people forget about is they try to go at that meeting alone. But say, for example, you already own a business. You have a CFO. You may have a general manager that's in that industry. Take them all to the meeting. bring the team with you and show the bench strength that you have to say, hey, here's me, I'm the owner, and you're going to do the tough conversation with me, but running the day-to-day business, transitioning the business, we're going to do that as a team. So show off your team if you have it, because sellers really are going to lock onto that and say, wow, this person has a team, whereas all these other buyers, they're just kind of Joe Schmoes and they've never owned a business before. Okay, so addressing the seller's concerns is very important to building your credibility as a buyer. Okay, so these soft issues are very, very important. The funny part is you as a buyer are going into that meeting to not only communicate your ability, but you need information as well, right? I'm going to put in an offer for this business. The business is worth $4 million. What do I need to get out of this meeting, right? So again, I talked about the fine line between selling yourself, but also getting information from the seller. So it's important to spend that first half of the meeting selling yourself, but then convert that direction towards now getting information that you need to get comfortable to submit an offer for the business or close on the deal. And the very first thing that I recommend that you do if you're a buyer interviewing a seller is focus on the reasoning for the sale. Okay, the broker, the investment banker is going to have a really good down-packed answer whenever someone says, well, why is the owner selling? And, they're smooth, they're slick, that's our job. But, you want to hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Why are you selling? Look in their eyes, look in their pupils, and get a really good feel for, is this reason real? Is this really why they're exiting this business, or is there something else? And I'll tell you, sometimes, especially when sellers are selling for maybe the wrong reasons and not saying it, that direct question in that meeting really reveals a lot and can really uncover a lot of things. So that's really, I think, a critical question to ask. The other thing is, again, an advisor is going to kind of give you the slick answer, but now you're getting into the nitty gritty. And again, don't focus too much on the financial details as much as the more qualitative issues of the business in this meeting. So get an understanding. Walk me through a day-to-day for you as the owner. What do? You check your bank accounts, you talk to customers, do you do AR collections? What do you kind of do on a day-to-day basis? Tell me about your key employees. What do they do? How long they've been around? Do they trust you? Do you feel that they would work well with me? What about your management team? What does that look like? So get a good understanding of the human capital and the transition requirements of that business. So what are you looking for in 6 months' time? Do you still want to work here? What about 12 months' time? Okay, you want to start traveling in 12 months' time. So would you be comfortable working a full 5 days for 12 months or a full 5 days for 6 months and then go down to 3 days for the remaining 6 months? Get an understanding for what they're looking for. And again, these self-directed questions allow the seller to think through that. And funny enough, the broker is going to give you the convenient answer, but you're going to get the real unfiltered answer directly from the seller. So again, ask them head on. You may have asked these questions of the broker. They may have already provided these answers, but these are questions that you want to ask again, for sure. Now, the other one is business outlook. Describe the business outlook and the opportunities. If you're 20 years younger, how would you grow this business? Where do you see the business next year? What are some things that are keeping you up at night that, or you're scared of? Get a feel for how the owner communicates that to you. Look at their reaction and their facial expression. That's why in-person meetings are so important, because people can get really comfortable or get really uncomfortable if they're hiding something, right? So you want to make sure that you're asking these really overarching key underlying questions that will define whether you're really interested in this business and want to put in an offer or not. Some other issues could be discussing competitors, things they'll never put in an email. If you were to put in an email questionnaire, tell me your competitors and what you think of them and all that kind of stuff. They're not going to put that in writing, but you're going to be there. You've probably built some good respect, and you've kind of built that trust, hopefully by doing a good job in the first half meeting. That now you're in the second half, you can ask the tougher questions. What do you think of your competitors? Are they good? Where do they stand in terms of pricing? And they may be able to open up a little bit more and give you a little bit more key information. And then, obviously, macro trends. Why is this happening? What is happening with sales or profits or gross margin? Why are costs increasing? And, getting the stories and the kind of day-to-day business reasons behind the numbers. Again, I think a lot of financial investors, they drill down into the specific numbers, whereas a business owner says, well, my sales were down because my VP of business development left. Oh, my costs are up because pricing has increased. My inventory is up because I wanted to mitigate to make sure that I could deliver customer orders on time because that's a very critical factor for me to keep my customers happy. Blah, 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 right? So you kind of want to talk through those things. And those things, again, you can answer them on paper, but it's better to get the owner's direct gut reaction and answer to that. And then the last thing I'd say is touring the facility is very important, right? Especially if you're buying physical assets like a manufacturing or distribution business. So the best way to incorporate a tour is to first get the introduction, sit down, tell your story, build the trust first, then say, hey, before we get into the business questions, how about we do a tour of the facility? Go tour the facility. Some questions may be answered simply by going through and visually seeing how the business works, then come back and then drill down into the specific questions that you have. And there may be other questions that come up due to the tour. But again, I always talked about confidentiality. Make sure that before you go and tour the facility, you ask the owner quickly, hey, can I ask you questions while we're on tour, or should I wait till we're back in the meeting room? And just, again, showing that level of respect. And if you do that, I'll tell you, very rarely do buyers do that. I would say only the top, most frequent, really ultra professional buyers are asking those type of questions. And so you as an individual buyer, especially for smaller businesses where probably the pros are not really looking at those types of businesses, if you take that approach, it just communicates such a high level of respect and professionalism that it's really going to set you apart in that process. So that's really it for this video. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you have any questions, just comment below. And as well, if you have any funny stories of site visits, then you can also comment below or reach out to me at LinkedIn at my name, Robert Bezed, or you can refer to my M&A firm website, Robley Capital. And again, just as a quick background, we primarily work with Canadian businesses, anywhere from about $1 to $50 million in value, mostly on the sell side. So selling businesses primarily to strategics, financial investors, and private equity firms. So if you have a business that you're looking to sell, please also reach out to me. Other than that, have a great day, guys. Thanks.